Hello all, just a quick introduction. My name is Janessa Berlanga and I am a graduate student and a GRA with the Graduate Student Academic Success Center here at TAMIU. So today we'll be going over the new APA 7 manual that came out the fall before last, I believe in October 2019. We're going to take a look at what are some of the changes between this APA 7 manual and the previous APA 6 version. We're also looking at formatting of APA documents, InText citations, and the reference page. This presentation was developed by our writing consultant, Franco Zamora, here at the Advanced Research and Curriculum office. So I do want to give a little disclaimer about the information we're sharing. It is up to date with the latest APA 7 guidelines, but we want to encourage you to always refer back to your professor's instructions and the syllabi in order to follow their preferences should they differ from the APA 7 guidelines. So let's get started. When writing InText citations, it is important to note that you can now shorten it with et al. Right away. So this occurs when the source has 3 or more authors. In the past, you were able to have the first citation include all the authors' last names, and then all subsequent citations of that same source would need the abbreviation et al. So that's no longer the case, and in the example below, you can see it written out. The reference page has lots of changes as well. The publisher location is no longer included in the references, so this is mainly for books that you may reference. Additionally, you can include last names and initials for up to 20 authors. So previously, this number was only up to 7 authors. I'm not sure that you'll see many articles with that many authors, but if you do, you can rest assured that you can list each and every one. Also, the text DOI, which stands for Digital Object Identifier, is no longer needed. You can actually just format the DOI just like you would a URL. Likewise, the text retrieved from is not necessary, unless you have an actual retrieval date. For instance, if you are citing a website, and in that case you would need to remember to cite the website name and that the website page would be italicized. When citing books, you don't have to cite which platform or device you used. So as an example, last semester I cited an audiobook and I didn't have to include the platform that I found it on, which was Audible. Lastly, the APA 7 has new guidelines for more media citations, such as podcasts, social media posts, and hashtags. What's new continued? Stylistically, the APA 7 encourages the use of bias-free and inclusive language, thus allowing your writing to be more current and reflective of the social climate. This means that the singular they is now included as a gender-neutral pronoun. The new guidelines also encourage person-first language, and the examples noted here are using people living in poverty and people who are disabled or with disabilities instead of the poor or the disabled. Along that thread, we are encouraged to use age ranges rather than broad categories. So in the example we see, instead of saying people over 65 years old, we would now say people in the age range of 65 to 75. So we move on to formatting. You might be excited to hear that you have a lot more options for fonts and font sizes. You can choose between Calibri 11, Arial 11, Lucinda Sans Unicode 10, the Times New Roman, which is the OG, and Georgia 11. Additionally, you no longer need to include the text running head in the header. In fact, for student papers, a running head is no longer needed at all. That is, of course, unless your professor requests it. In general, all that you are needing for your student papers is the page number at the top right. Lastly, we now only need one space after a period at the end of a sentence. So, let's look more closely at the formatting of student papers. As I already mentioned, the running head is no longer required at the top of your paper, neither is the text running head. All that you would need to include is the page number at the top right of your assignment. For published papers, or if your professor is still preferring for you to include a running head, It will now be formatted with the shortened title in all caps at the top left and the page number at the top right. Be sure to use the appropriate font type and size, and as a general rule, always defer to your professor's instructions. On the right, you can see a guideline for the format of your title page. It should include the title of your paper, completely your name, the department and institute or university name, the course number and section, your course instructor's name, and the due date at the bottom, all centered in the middle of the page. Let's look more closely at those in-text citations. As before, you would use only the author's last name and the year of publication. You don't need to include a specific page number or text location unless you are using a direct quote or if it's your instructor's preference. You will need to use citations for both direct quotes and paraphrases. So remember, if it wasn't your original idea, you would need to cite where you found it. Let's look at some of the examples below. So in the first example we see is of a parenthetical citation. Here is when an author's idea is presented in the sentence, and then in parentheses, the author's last name and the publication date is listed with a comma in between each piece of information. That comes at the end of a sentence, and it's followed by the period. In the second example, we see a narrative citation. This happens when the citation is embedded within the sentence, and it doesn't need to be at the end. Usually, in this case, one or both pieces of information are a part of the sentence. So only part of it needs to be in parentheses, or the parentheses are simply not needed. Like the example on the screen, you can say, according to Kellogg, 2020, they're made with extra fiber. Or you could say, in 2020, Kellogg made cereal with extra fiber. And in that case, there's no need for the extra citation information. If the information you're citing was found in multiple sources, then you would cite all of them in the same parentheses set, alphabetically, and separated by a semicolon. For works with no author, then you would cite the title of the source and the year only. When you're citing a publication with only two authors, you can separate them by an ampersand. As I've already mentioned, works with 3 or more authors immediately require listing of the first author last name followed by et al. As we continue to look at in-text citations, we start to see where things get kind of tricky. So what happens if a group or organization is the author? In that case, you would name the organization or institute and give the publication date as usual. Try to use an abbreviation of the organization in subsequent citations. What happens when you have 2 different works by the same author? You can simply cite both works separately, and in this case, the publication date will usually be different in order to differentiate between the 2 works. What happens when you have 2 different works by authors with the same last name? At that point, you can include the author's first initials to differentiate between the 2. What about when you have multiple works with 3 or more authors that share authors? Well, remember when I said you can list up to 20 author names in a citation? Well, here is where that rule comes in handy, because you will need to include as many authors as it takes to differentiate between the 2 works. Finally, what happens when your text has no publication date? Generally, we would suggest that you make every attempt to find the date, but if all else fails, you can use the initials ND to signify no date. Your bibliography, or references. Let's look at the references page. For starters, any work that you cite in your text must show up on your reference page, and vice versa. Next, it's important to know that there is a basic structure. You need to include the authors using surnames and initials, the publication date in parentheses, the source title in sentence case, followed by the publication or journal title italicized and with proper title capitalization, followed by the publication volume and issue number, the page range, and the DOI or URL. Okay, so here the important takeaway is that online sources can come in all different kinds of sources that are not necessarily websites. So it's best to try to identify what your source is and cite only as a web page as a last resort. Online sources can be journals, newspapers, or periodicals, videos, and web-based books or media. It may take a little extra digging and closer examination to figure out exactly what a source is, but your professor is looking for that detail and specificity. Missing reference information. What can you do if your reference is missing certain pieces of information? Below is a handy reference list for you to use. If your source has no author, you highlight the source title and the publication date, as well as whatever other relevant information you have. If your source has no date, you indicate the author followed by the abbreviation ND, as we mentioned before, the title, and the relevant source information. If your source has no title, you include the author, the date, a description of your source in brackets, and other source information. If the source has no author or date, you then indicate the source title, the abbreviation ND, and your source info. Finally, if your source has no author and no title, you include a description of the source in brackets, followed by the year and the source information. So now let's talk italics and capitalizations. When your source is a standalone work, such as a book, film, website, or a publication like a journal or a newspaper, you can italicize the title and use title case in your text. You do not need to italicize the titles of articles, essays, short stories, or chapters contained within the larger publication. When considering when and how to use capitalization, remember that within your text or document, you use title case, but within your references, you would use sentence case for all sources except journals and web page titles. As we get into the weeds of the reference page, you'll notice that there are only special instances where italics are necessary. For a book title, the title of the book is italicized, but nothing else is. For an article from a journal or other journal-style publication, such as a magazine, the title of an article is not italicized, but the title of the journal is italicized, along with the volume number. So note, there is usually a comma between these items, and that's also not italicized. But that tends to be one of those tiny details that a lot of times gets missed. For a web page, only the title of the web page itself is italicized. The title of the website that contains the page is not. The formatting for italicization is preserved even if the titles of the items are shifted around in the reference due to missing or unavailable information, such as when a title is used in place of an author's name. The following 4 slides are simply more examples of how to format the sources in your reference page. While it is difficult to showcase here, please remember that your references must have a hanging indent, and you'll notice that there are page numbers listed for you to be able to reference your own copy of the APA 7 manual and verify. So authored books with a DOI, you can find that on page 321. You would include the authors with the last name and the initial, the year in parentheses, the book title, the edition or volume number if provided, along with the publisher and any URL or DOI information you have. A report by a government agency or other organization, that would be found on page 329, and you include the organization name, the year, the title of the report or report number if given, the publisher or parent agencies, which are not mentioned as the author, and then the website where you found that. So an example is the National Cancer Institute 2018 Facing Forward Life After Cancer Treatment, in parentheses, NIH publication number 182424. the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, comma, National Institutes of Health, and then it includes the website where they found that. So a chapter in an edited book with a DOI, and you can find that information on page 326. You include the author, the year, the chapter title, the editor's name with comma ed dot or editors dot, the book title with the edition and volume number if given, the page numbers or the entire chapter, the publisher, and the DOI information if the source is not from a database. So with the journal article, it's the format that we've kind of been going over. That would be the authors, the year, the article title, which would be a sentence case, the journal title in title case, the volume number with parentheses, issue number if it's provided, and then a page range that that article is located, as well as the DOI. For a magazine article, you can turn to page 320 in your APA manual, and there you would see that the format is the author, the year, and the month and day that it's published. That would be in parentheses. The article title in sentence case, the magazine title in title case with the volume number, the issue if provided in parentheses, the page range, and the DOI or URL if it's found online. Okay, for a newspaper article, you can also reference page 320. You would include the author's name, the month or the year, month, and day, the article title, the newspaper title, and the page number that it's found on. For a web page on a website, you can reference page 351. You need to include the author, the year, month, day in parentheses, the title of the work, the site name that you found it on, and then the actual website, the website URL where you would find that source. And then for artwork in a museum or on a museum website, you can reference page 346. For that, you would include the artist's name, the year or years which it was showcased or created, the title with brackets around the medium or the format of the art piece itself, the museum that it's located in, the city where that museum is, and the state if it's applicable, and the country as well. So that example listed there, you can see all of those different pieces. So as we mentioned, you can now find different types of media in the APA manual to be able to cite it. Here we can see the YouTube video or another streaming video, and that would be on page 344. For that, you can include the author, the screen name in brackets, in parentheses the year, the month, and the date. You would include the title of the video, and in parentheses you would indicate that it is a video. So the video source, which I think would probably be the channel that it's located on, and then of course the URL to access that video. Okay, and in the parentheses it looks like actually the source would just be YouTube if that's where you're finding your video. For a television series from an online streaming service, you would include the executive producer, and you would indicate that's the executive producer by putting that within parentheses, following that person's name, the years it was streamed, the title of the series, as well as the description of the series in brackets, and then the name of the producer, followed by a URL to access the video. So here in the example you see Rosenberg, M would be the executive producer, the years that the video was streamed, the title of the series, Jessica Jones, and then I guess the description looks like it's a series, the Netflix series. So the producer would be Netflix, and then you have the website URL to access it. So if you've stuck with me this far, thank you so much for joining me and taking a good look at the APA 7 manual and all the changes and improvements it's made. If you find yourself stuck when writing, be sure to reference your own copy or borrow ours here at the Graduate Student Academic Success Center located in PLG 203. Don't forget to check out the many graduate writing resources offered by the GSASC through the TAMIU ARC grant. As always, happy writing and see you next time.